from the American Academy of Pediatrics.
As the Summer Olympics wind down, sports and competition are front and center. It has been so exciting to watch these elite athletes thrive. But did you know sports can be a hugely protective and positive force in the lives of all kids?
Sports can help young people to learn that their efforts pay off, that their hard work is worth it. And sports can teach young people that when they fall down, they can get back up again.
Welcome to Healthy Children, the podcast for parents from the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'm Dr. Edith Bracha Sanchez. I am a pediatrician and a mama figuring it out. This is a judgment-free space where all questions are good questions, and the answers will hopefully be even better. Let's get started. Today, we're talking about the power of sports in kids and teens' lives. We're going to talk about the studies, the logistical, practical aspects of it all, when to stick with it, when to let kids quit, and so much more. And to help us, we have with us Dr. Chris Rengillian. He is a pediatrician who specializes in sports and adolescent medicine, who's now the medical director of the Lawrenceville School in New Jersey. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, Edith. It's so great to see you.
It is so nice to see you. I have been wanting to have this conversation with you, so I'm just so excited that we get to have it today.
Me as well.
Chris, full disclosure, didn't grow up in a sports culture. I kind of wish that I had. I came to this country in the 9th grade. We moved to a Florida suburb with a real sports culture. And I remember thinking, wow, this is how I make friends. So I joined a soccer team. I was not very good, I'll admit, but I did make friends in a period of my life when I found myself a little lost. I was in a new country, right? And it had this tremendous positive effect on my life. You have watched the effect of sports on kids and teens in your professional life. Tell us, what do you see?
Edith, you're absolutely right. I see every day that sports can be a powerful and positive force in the lives of young people. I see that sports can help young people to form connections, both with other kids and adults, sometimes in ways that are easier than if they're sitting across the table trying to have a conversation with back and forth. The dynamics of conversation become a whole lot easier for a young person when their mind can wander while they're throwing a ball or going for a run. I also see that sports can help young people to learn that their efforts pay off, that their hard work is worth it. And sports can teach young people that when they fall down, they can get back up again, sometimes get back up again and do even better than they did before.
Chris, and in hearing you speak, I'm remembering conversations I've had with my husband who didn't grow up in a big sports culture. He played basketball through college. And, he sort of always tells me I learned resilience and I learned about failure and trying again and getting back up through sports. And I wonder, Chris, we all sort of come to this with our own personal experience with or without being exposed to sports. What was your experience? How did you end up being a sports doctor?
Well, Edith, to be clear about my own personal journey, sports weren't a big part of my early childhood or elementary school years. When I was in middle school, I caught the bug about gymnastics and became really interested in the sport. In many cases, begged and pleaded with my parents to allow me to do more gymnastics and to make a bigger commitment to training within the sport. And they actually held me back. They wanted me to pursue other things. They wanted me to have a broad portfolio of experiences as a middle school and high school student. But when I got to college, I had the opportunity to walk on to the varsity men's gymnastics team. And that was a hugely impactful period of explosive growth for me, both in athletic pursuits and achievement, and also in forming connections with others. So part of this is I want to get rid of the myth that as a current sports guy, I've been involved in sports my entire life, or that I had a family that was trying to push that the whole time. Ultimately, sports became a part of my life because it was a spark that was lit for me that my family actually tried to put into balance. And then over time, I was able to explore further on my own, knowing that it was really my own interest and passion.
Yeah, I love that, Chris. And it's so reassuring to hear it as a mom, right? That there's no such thing as you must have this early, dedication in life. And it is totally a force that can be positive no matter when you involve your child or yourself in sports. Now, at a larger level, Chris, what do the studies show about the mental health benefits of sports?
So, Edith, what we've seen is that time and time again, the research has shown that young people who participate in sports and physical recreation are more likely to be protected from negative mental health conditions, including anxiety and depression. They may also be more resilient, meaning better able to handle some of life's big adversities. And there may be other benefits, not just in terms of their physical development and motor skill development, but also their development of social skills and even how they perform in the classroom. Saying that, I also want to make sure that we don't take those benefits for granted. There are some environments created by sports or related to sports that can sometimes undermine all of that positive development that young people can experience. And so when we talk about the benefits of sports and physical activity, I want to make sure that we're having that conversation holistically and not taking those values for granted.
Yeah, totally. Can I ask you, Chris, one thing I have found myself really thinking about as a mom lately. Full disclosure, my little guy has to wear glasses now. It's been a lot of things lately. And I really have been wanting to foster his self-esteem. It is something, I don't know why. It's not something I had ever thought about as a pediatrician, to be honest, or I had to the extent that it protects against certain mental health conditions. But lately as a mom, I'm really thinking about self-esteem. What is the role of sports in building self-esteem? And how does it work if I put my child in a sport and they're not very good at it? And what are the opportunities there for me as a mom, Chris?
So I probably should have said this at the start. Maybe I should have stopped you and made sure I kind of said this in big neon letters at the beginning of our conversation. Young people will benefit most from sporting experiences that empower them to connect their efforts with joy. Their efforts with joy as often as possible in as many different ways as possible, while also keeping sports in balance with life's other needs and values. There's a few pieces of that statement to unpack, but what I want the parents of young children to be focused on is that introducing a child to sports or to physical recreation, first and foremost, should be about caring about discovery, exposing them to as many different activities, as wide a variety as you possibly can, for a couple of reasons. One is through discovery, you're trying to light sparks for them. You want them to find that different activities can bring them joy, maybe first feel awkward, but then can be more interesting as they continue. You want them to learn that they can fall down and get back up again. And developmentally, you also want them to experience a range of different movement patterns and how those movement patterns make them feel, because in doing so, you're actually helping them to build the repertoire, the library of physical experiences that help to promote physical development, motor skill development, but also some of the emotional development and regulation that will serve them well later on in life. So in fostering your child's self-esteem, I want you to know it might feel messy at first. It should. It's all about experimentation. It's all about exposure. And the first 3 or 10 different opportunities you connect them with may not land right. But I want you to trust that in exposing them to different sports, physical activities, you are lighting those little sparks for them. But I think that's really the mission at this stage in life.
I needed to hear that as a mom, Chris. Because listen, I have to tell you, I'm starting to have these small little experiences, right? Of ways that he may be different. He already is different. And I'm able to roll with so many of those. He's unique. He's different. He's awesome. But there are times that I'm like, oh gosh, I don't want you to be picked on for this reason or that reason. It's a very real experience that is new to me as a mom. And I think definitely applies to sports. So I love the focus on the little sparks that you're igniting as you expose them to different experiences. Now, Chris, for kids who are already suffering from a mental health condition, kids who already struggle with anxiety, who already struggle with depression. I can imagine that getting started or joining a sports team might be a little more challenging, but what are the benefits there, Chris?
Yes, you're exactly right, Edith, that sometimes getting started is the hardest part, and finding the right fit for your young person and a sport can also be really challenging. If they haven't yet connected with the world of sports or physical recreation, sometimes trying to find the right fit can also be discouraging. But for so many young people, sports or other forms of physical recreation may be the first thing that they experience that makes them realize that their efforts can be connected with feeling good and that their efforts can also pay off and where they can build confidence by developing skills or doing something they didn't think they could do before. So I think it's a worthwhile journey for many families and children to go on, particularly when they're not feeling their best. We also have learned through bench research, but also real world research with real teens and real anecdotal experience that exercise and the social element of sports can help young people to feel less anxious, to become exposed to different ways to manage their worries, and it can also lift our moods. A good example of this would be even thinking about what exercise has meant for many of us. I hear all the time from adults who talk about the stress that they were under, how they couldn't think clearly, speak clearly, they felt overwhelmed. And then they went out for a run. And on the run, their mind kind of unwound a little bit. They had their bright idea. They came up with this solution. And when they got home, they felt like they had had a breakthrough and they were able to move past it. That happens on the micro level with a single run or a bout of exercise, but there are also additive effects where the sum of doing multiple rounds of physical activity over days, weeks, months can be greater than just the parts. Meaning, if we do these things over time, the benefits that we reap from regular physical activity, in particular when it's fun and when it's connected with other people and we have a passion for it, the benefits we reap are even more than just hopping on a treadmill or going for a run. These things build up over time, and the growth we can see is exponential.
The growth, Chris, the growth. I love the word growth because it's really what we're striving for, right? It's that growth and that journey that we're guiding our kids through. Now, let's talk a little bit about the everyday practicalities here. Chris, I don't have to tell you, there is such an emphasis on academics these days. I think the message that many parents, myself included, and young people are hearing is that getting into college has never been harder. How do you advise families to balance academics and the real world pressures that are out there with things like sports?
One of the things I want to acknowledge here is that the pressures that young people and families, to be frank, feel around academics are often the same as the pressures that they feel around athletics. I don't think in today's day and age that we can have this conversation without talking about what we call achievement culture.
Yes, let's go there, Chris.
All right. So achievement culture is something that I think many of us have experienced. We've been steeped in, we see all around us, but it can be tough to describe and name. And there's some folks who have done a great job of describing it and recognizing it for what it is in recent years. One author who I think has done a particularly good job of detailing achievement culture is Jennifer Brenny-Wallace, who has written a book called Never Enough. The idea is that achievement culture involves a constant pressure on kids to excel. And the reasons for that, so through achievement culture, it's really a worldview that sees childhood as a training ground for adulthood. And in that view, performing excellently in childhood seems to be the only path to guarantee thriving in adulthood. This kind of culture, this worldview, one of the symptoms of it is what we call intensive parenting, right? So this is the pressure that parents feel to manage everything from what's on their kids' plate to the preschool they go to so they can get into their right elementary school and middle school and right college, all while doing a curated list of extracurricular activities so they can go to that great school and finally be a successful adult. This worldview can be overwhelming.
So overwhelming. I'm experiencing it right now. So overwhelming.
Yeah. I have a lot of sympathy for parents here, right? Parents are trying their best. Parents are also trying to navigate a world that has some real changing economic forces in it, right? We've seen an increase in economic inequality over decades, globalization, the crush of the middle class, the way that the media portrays opportunity. Parents are trying to navigate a lot. And of course, they have their young person's long-term best interests at heart. But one of the problems with achievement culture is that it kind of defines success in this really narrow way. The other concern is that achievement culture can make all of us feel an intense fear of failure. If we deviate from the path just a little bit, we may be sacrificing all of the long-term successes that we hope for. When we view success or survival in just this way, at its worst, it can actually crowd out the things that kids need most to thrive. What do kids need most to thrive? They need the unconditional love of their parents, and they also need a lot of unstructured free play, meaning play that they have directed, that they explore, where they can do no wrong, where they can fall down and get back up again and still have a good time. When everything is prescribed and everything is high stakes, it can be really hard to achieve both of those things. Children who are raised fully in achievement culture, and I think there's a spectrum here, may come to believe that they're loved more when they perform well. The flip side to that, kind of the dark side, is they may also fear that if they don't succeed in the ways that their parents have planned out for them, that love and care can be withdrawn. And that's a profoundly insecure foundation for life.
Yeah. And not something that anyone listening, I'm sure, wants their kids to feel.
That's right. In fact, part of my sympathy for parents here is that achievement culture is not just parent driven. I think even parents who are aware of achievement culture and are doing their best to fight against it will find that it's everywhere. Kids receive these messages.
We're laughing because I'm going, yes, everywhere. I'm just nodding as Chris is talking. It really is. And it starts young. Yeah. It starts so young.
And so even when we do our best to convey to kids that we love them unconditionally, they can sometimes, right or wrong, still feel the message that their worth is based on their performance. And so actually, we have to do a lot to counteract that and to remind them that what matters most to us is that they are deserving of love, that they can grow to become caring, competent, wonderful human beings, and that our love is not contingent on whether or not they perform in a certain way or get a certain score.
So let's talk about the day-to-day, right? And how this would play out. So say, for example, I'm trying to expose my little guy to different things, different sports, different activities. We start something, we committed for the season, as these things usually work. You pay for the season, you're committed to that season, and then he doesn't like it, Chris. What do I do? When do I say we're sticking with it? We have committed. This is a commitment and we honor our commitments. And when do I say, okay, you didn't like it. You don't feel like you're good at it. It's not bringing you joy. No big deal. How do we find the right balance here?
Some of the best advice I've heard on this, I've heard it from real parents. I've also heard it written by experts in positive psychology. In fact, I think Angela Duckworth, who has led the development of the concept of grit, passion, and perseverance for long-term outcomes, has, I think, used this rule of thumb as well. And that it can be helpful to remind your kid that they're going to commit to an activity for one season. If they have a bad day, or if they feel like a failure after falling down at one practice, they got to get up and try again for one season. Once we get through the scope of a whole season, as a family, we're often better equipped to make a holistic assessment. How much fun did we have, and how much did we learn? I think this also translates to some of the first questions we should ask our kids when they get back in the car after practice. It can be really tempting to ask, did you win the game? How many goals did you score? And I want to remember what messages we send when we ask those questions first. The first question I want a child to hear when they get in the car is, how much fun did you have? How much did you learn today?
Yeah.
And the answers to that may vary day to day, but by asking that question first, we let them know that those are the things that matter most.
I love that. Now, Chris, let's keep playing this out as it goes on a day-to-day with a parent and a child or a family that's enrolled in a sport. Let's say they're really good at it. And, they keep playing, and sometimes parents can get really into it. And, we've all seen reports out there, stories that go viral of the competition and the talk getting a little bit unhealthy on the court, right? How do we keep the competition healthy and supportive for kids and teens?
So the way that I think about this, we started with the idea that for younger children and those who are new to organized sports, we care about sports because we care about discovery. We want to set up opportunities for them to find that spark, and we want them to collect as many sparks as possible. But for children who are already connected to organized sports, our focus should shift a little bit. Our focus should be on showing them that we care about sports because they care about sports. What I mean by that is we want them to know that we experience genuine delight in watching them pursue something that they truly enjoy, and in watching as they learn to follow their own pursuits. And beyond that, sports isn't about us. Keeping that at the center can be really hard, but it's important for us always to continue to come back to it. When we behave in ways that include getting too much into the game, becoming really invested in our kids' performance, becoming very invested in the decisions or coaching styles of the other adults that surround them when they're engaged in sports, sometimes what we are doing is we're conveying to them that we're very invested in the sport. We can send the message that what we care about, maybe the only thing we care about, the only thing we give attention to is when our kids are playing sports and when they're performing well. This, right or wrong, can make our kids believe, again, that everything that we value, our time, attention, our connection to them, is contingent on how they're doing, whether they win or lose. In the long run, this can actually backfire both our relationship with them as well as their development in sports.
Yeah.
And so I think we all can get into it. We can all get carried away with some of the enthusiasm, but I'd like to put at the center here this idea that our focus on sports is really about the fact that our kids love them, are passionate about them. And if they're not, we should question why we're there.
So let's keep playing this out, Chris. Let's say a kid is in a sport, they're doing really well. There's this temptation to keep putting them in the same sport and to keep putting all resources into them, performing even better and better in that sport. Is that advisable? What are the rules of thumb there?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that temptation is part of our real world. So what you're referring to is what we call early sports specialization. So this is the idea that a young person should commit early to a single sport and train intensively in that sport, usually to the exclusion of other sports and activities. And it's usually, in many cases, it's based on the idea that by committing early, they will gain advantages over others, and this will ensure their long-term success.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really important, and this has become clear through research at the Olympic level, the professional level, and the collegiate level, that early specialization is a bit of a myth. It turns out that elite athletes they actually delayed specialization compared to their non-elite peers.
Huh.
Really successful, high-performing athletes, and in particular the healthiest and the happiest ones, often played 2 or more other sports prior to or in parallel with what eventually became their main sport.
Huh. I didn't know that, Chris.
Yeah. They also delay specializing, choosing one sport to focus on until late adolescence, so maybe 16 or after. And in general, they also delayed training in really intense ways until late adolescence. So if you look at real world results, the people who performed the best as adult athletes didn't engage in early specialization at all. The other thing to keep in mind here is that kids who specialize in sports early tend to have shorter sporting careers overall, and early specialization may also come with some harms. For example, specializing in one sport at an early age can crowd out opportunities to gain exposure to a range of other physical experiences. In some ways, so while a kid looks like they're honing expertise in a really narrow range of sports skills, it can actually stunt their motor development and their physical literacy in ways that in the long run would both promote their athletic performance and protect them from injury. The other thing that can happen is that kids can get exposure to a lot of repetitive training in this very narrow set of skills that are sometimes high risk. So baseball pitching is a great example. The mechanical forces that the elbow and the shoulder are exposed to during pitching can be hard. And when a kid has been pitching and only pitching from elementary school through high school, they may be more likely to experience pretty serious injuries. And the same is true of other sports. The last thing that I would kind of point out about early specialization is that it often involves participating on more than one team in the same sport. And this can lead to overscheduling
and burnout.
Yeah, this is exhausting for kids and families.
Yeah.
And we want to remember that the high school team, for example, and that travel select or club team, those training schedules may not be well coordinated with each other. So that can mean that kids miss out on coordinated, well-timed opportunities for rest and recovery.
And joy, right? That joy that you have been centering our conversation on seems like it's at risk of going out the window when we're doing some of this. So what I'm hearing from you is that not necessarily a good idea to specialize early in a specific sport.
Yeah, so the expert recommendations, and this is from the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Society for Sports Medicine, the National Athletic Training Association, all evidence-based. The recommendations are that kids should sample as many sports as they can in early childhood. They should delay specialization for as long as possible, at least until age 16 or mid to late adolescence, if they specialize at all. And then there's a couple of other rules of thumb that can be really helpful in making sure they get enough recovery. That's having 2 recovery days a week, that they get a break from sports, organized sports, at least 3 months out of the year, usually in 1 month increments, and that they just participate in one team at a time. Combine those things can help to make sure that young people are protected from injuries and burnout, and it may actually help them to have that long-term success that some families are looking for.
I love that. Centering it on our kids once again. And Chris, you've given us so many nuggets of information and wisdom throughout this conversation, but we do like to close our episodes with what we call a parenting prescription. When it comes to sports and athletics, what is one thing you want all our listeners to know?
As I said at the start, the core philosophy that's really at the center of this conversation is the idea that young people will benefit most from sporting experiences that empower them to connect their efforts with joy as often as possible and in as many ways as possible, while keeping sports in balance with life's other needs and values. That's it. If we're not connecting their efforts with joy, and if we're not giving them a range of opportunities, we're missing on a whole world of potential.
Dr. Chris Rengillian, so much amazing information. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Edith.
And thank you at home for joining us. If you like the Healthy Children podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app and help us spread the word. Follow Healthy Children on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads at Healthy Children AAP, and be sure to visit healthychildren.org, the parenting website of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Healthy Children is a production of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Our creative team includes
Anne Johnsos,
Doug Nagel,
Susan Stevens-Martin,
Laura Alessio,
Jackie Ortega,
Mary Claire Walsh,
Hannah Weston,
Kathy Jewell,
Catherine Beard,
and Gareth Brown.
and our theme music was composed by Doug Nagel. We'll be back next week. I'm Dr. Edith Bracho Sanchez. Thanks for listening.